Hello everyone, Zach here for MTG Friends, back with another Commander deck tech. This one's a little behind schedule, but that's okay. We're going to be covering Obuun, Mul Daya Ancestor today. I really wanted to get this one done before, Zendikar Rising had been out for a while, but we're trying to get this one in before Commander Legends previews start very, very soon. And so, here it is! So, like I said, we're covering Obuun, Mul Daya Ancestor that you're going to see on the center of your screen right now. He is a 4-drop, a legendary elf spirit. He is a 3/3, and he costs 1 red, green, white. He says at the beginning of combat on your turn, up to 1 target land you control becomes an XX elemental creature with trample and haste until end of turn, where X is Obuun's power. It's still a land. And landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a 1/1 counter on target creature. 99.9% of the time you're going to be putting that counter directly onto Obuun himself, because odds are you kind of need, counters on him. Really, the goal here is to make an absolutely giant land with Obuun, which is why I have called this deck the Exorcism of Obuun. He's essentially possessing a land while still having the ability to attack as well, and punching somebody in the face with it. Super fun. Alright, so let's go ahead and go through the things this deck is going to be trying to do. First and foremost, we are going to be trying to hit landfall as much as possible. That's why we have an absolutely massive ramp category of 17 ramp cards. The majority of them are allowing us to play extra lands every turn, though things like Smothering Tithe, Mana Crypt, and the 2 talismans that I've elected to play in this deck, as well as Soul Ring and Arcane Signet, are in here because, ramp, Dockside as well. Birds, Avacyn's Pilgrim, we've got Llanowar, we've got Elvish Mystic, all of those cards that are going to produce us mana and allow us to blow through our spells. Additionally, we have a bunch of the extra lands. We have Wayward Swordtooth, which is a really great card. It was underrated for quite a while, actually, but it looks like its price is finally caught up with the expectation here. But it's a 3-drop 5/5 with Ascend, which is the mechanic from Ixalan. What is it? Rivals of Ixalan, I believe. And you can play an additional land. Oh, yeah, Rivals. It's literally right there on my screen. Sorry. You can play an additional land on each of your turns, and the Swordtooth can't attack or block unless you have the City's Blessing, which means at one point while you had a permanent with Ascend on the board, you had 10 or more permanents on the board. Super easy to hit in this deck because of the sheer number of lands we're going to be dropping, as well as how fast this deck moves. So he's a great mana accelerator ramp, I guess. We have the classic Oracle of Mul Daya. He lets you play an additional land each turn. He lets you see the top card of your library and play lands from the top of your library. We have Dryad of the Elysian Grove, which is letting us play an additional land each turn and fixes our mana completely. And I mean, those 3 are pretty much more than enough, but we're not entirely done with the sheer amount of mana ramp we've got. But I didn't feel like we needed a truly ridiculous amount of ramp. I feel like cards like Burgeoning are going to fill in for us as well here. And I put Exploration here by accident. This is supposed to be over in ramp. Let's move that and save it real quick, which is going to wreck the layout, but that's okay. Back over to ramp. Sorry, follow along here. Exploration is the other play an additional land. You just drop it turn 1, you get an extra land off of it. And then, as I mentioned, we have Burgeoning up here as well, which is whenever an opponent plays a land, you can put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. So we're really looking to get as many lands as we can into our hand and then vomit them quickly onto the board, especially once we have Obuun and our massive number of landfall cards on the board to get huge advantage. So, like I said, ramp package is pretty typical. We've got Nature's Lore to search stuff out as well. We've got Farseek to search stuff up. And then just tap to add mana, make treasures, make your opponents pay to not make treasures, and then extra land drops. Additionally, I want to talk really briefly about why I'm only playing 2 of the talismans. I'm playing the green-white one, and I'm playing the red-green one. This is because, as you can kind of see just looking at the colors here, this deck is really, really primary in green, and then is secondary in white, but it's very, very low in its red. And because of that, as you can see in our stats here, red, green, white, red is probably our lowest color, and a lot of that red is coming from Living Twister, Morag, Omnath, and Shatterskull Summit here. And so I think it's really important that I guess we have access to Green have access to white, but then red is a little easier for us to kind of splash in there, especially with our land base. So I found that a talisman slot that was making our 2 lower colors wasn't quite as important, especially when we have Arcane Signet, and Dryad of the Elysian Grove that's going to fix us anyway. Hopefully that makes sense. Alright, so let's go ahead and jump into the Landfall Creatures next. Not even necessarily creatures, but landfall permanents. These are cards that are either providing us with landfall while not directly ramping us necessarily, as well as cards that pay off landfall. So first is Ancient Greenwarden. It is a brand new card from Zendikar Rising, one we've talked about on the channel back when it got spoiled. It's 6 mana, 4 green for an elemental, 5/7 with reach. It lets you play your lands from the graveyard, so fetch lands! As well as if a land entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, it triggers an additional time. So it's a land harmonicon. You get to double up your land triggers. We've got Ashaya, Soul of the Wild. This is like a really key protection piece for the deck, but it's not in protection because of the sheer amount of landfall triggers this card generates. 5 mana for a legendary elemental star. When its power and toughness is equal to the number of lands you control, and non-token creatures you control are forest lands in addition to their other types. This is a wonderful, wonderful combo. It's beautiful art with Dryad of the Elysian Grove, which is just going to be, making us... all of our lands are every type, so we're going to have any land we ever need, even just using our creatures with Ashaya. This card combos really well with some of the protection pieces I've included here, such as Terra Eternal, which you'll see if I can mouse over it. There we go. Which gives your lands indestructible, as well as Tomic, which means your lands in the battlefield and in graveyard can't be the targets of spells and abilities. So Ashaya is just an incredible, incredible protection piece, but also just allows every creature we play to additionally trigger our landfall. I already talked about burgeoning. It's kind of like opponent landfall, where whenever they play a land, we get to play a land. It's ramp, but it's also landfall. I have crop rotation here in the landfall category because primarily we're going to be using it to hit landfall triggers rather than using it to ramp into something ridiculous. But it's a really, really excellent way to, with Ashaya out, for instance, cash in our creature, like our mana dorks that we aren't really using anymore. We can sack them and turn it into a real land card, and I think that's pretty awesome. Additionally, we are playing Crucible of Worlds, which lets us play our lands from our graveyards, just like Ancient Greenwarden does. We're going to be playing Elvish Reclaimer, which very similarly to Crop Rotation is a card that can grow a little bit when there's 3 or more lands, but more importantly, it's a sack a land, search your library for any land card whatsoever, and put it onto the battlefield tapped. I think this is a very reasonable and affordable card in terms of the mana cost you have to pay, and it lets us trigger more landfall for Obuun and others. Next up, we have Embodiment of Insight. It is a 5 mana elemental, 4 and a green, for 4/4 Vigilance. Land creatures you control have Vigilance. Landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you can have a target land you control become a 3/3 elemental creature with haste until end of turn. That last bit is probably not going to be used as much unless an opponent is, tapped out, or if we have good attacks, but being able to turn your lands into creatures is a really important piece of this deck, and I think it's a good card. Very helpful, and it lets us attack with our lands and then still tap them for mana later. Next we have a Miria Angel for 2 white Angel flying. She's a 3/3. Whenever land enters, make a 1/1 bird. We just have so many lands entering that this card is just hilariously good. I really want to know why Card Kingdoms is $33 while TCG's is $166 though. Did somebody buy out a Miria Angel? That's kind of insane, and probably explains why the price here is looking so absurd. Okay, not much better. Evolution Sage. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, proliferate. This card is insane. So Proliferate is already immensely strong in this deck due to the fact that we're playing a 1/1 counter sub-theme, but the fact that it's triggering off of our landfall, and like I said, we have just an absurd amount of mana triggers, or landfall triggers, is just absolutely fantastic. And if you can get this out with Ancient Greenwarden out as well, you're just putting a stupid number of 1/1 counters onto Obuun and others regularly. Next up is another new card from Zendikar Rising, Felidar Retreat. It has landfall, and it's an enchantment for 3 and a white. It has landfall whenever a land enters under your control, choose 1. Create a 2/2 white cat beast, or put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control, and give them vigilance. So this is one of those cards that is already amazing for landfall, but also feeds into our growth and 1/1 counters strategy. Incredible go-wide card that pairs insanely well with what we're already trying to do. Alright, Knight of the Reliquary is our next one. This is already a card that grows by filling our graveyard with lands, but more importantly, you can sack a forest or plains, search your library for a land, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. It's great because it allows you to grab any land card whatsoever, and it's also just another easy way to trigger landfall. This is not a sorcery speed ability. All you have to do is tap. You can even block with it beforehand, and if you have Ashaya out, and you have your Embodiment of Insight out, he also has Vigilance, so you can swing with your hopefully giant knight and then tap him to get the forest or sack the forest and plains and get a land. Living Twister is another quick landfall enabler. Pay a green, return a tapped land you control to its owner's hand, and then you can just play it again. It's really good. And the discard, while less used, is at least still relevant if you've got a handful of lands that maybe you don't need on the battlefield, or you have a way to get your lands back from the graveyard, which this deck does really well. Alright, next one's another new one from Zendikar. Freaking gorgeous art. Morag, Fury of Akum. He's expensive. He's 6 mana, but he's a 6/6, and each creature you control gets +1/+0 for each time it's attacked this turn. And as we discussed on this channel before, Morag has essentially the best landfall trigger in the game. This dude is wild. Whenever a land enters, if it's your main phase, there's an additional combat phase after it. At the beginning of that combat, untap all creatures you control. It's psychotic. And what's especially excellent about Morag in this deck is that since Obuun says at the beginning of combat on your turn, every time you get one of these combats, you can animate another land and make it grow, because Obuun will get slightly bigger each time since his power will be raising each time they attack. Really incredible combo piece with Obuun, and it's just really easy to get an absolutely ridiculous number of lands from it. It's also really nice because it will then untap any lands that you've turned into creatures too, which I think is a big deal. Alright, next up we have Omnath, Locus of Rage. This is a classic. This is back from, Zendikar, the original battle for Zendikar, there we go. Landfall, whenever a creature enters, put a 5/5 red and green elemental creature token onto the battlefield. And whenever Omnath or another elemental dies, deal 3 to target creature or player. Alright, so it's 3 red, green, so he's pricey, don't get me wrong. He is 7 mana for a legendary elemental, but he's a 5/5, and the sheer number of tokens you can generate with Omnath is really wild. I think this is actually a very good card, and it provides protection for any elementals that you're playing, and then just also gives you dudes. Gives you big dudes. Ramanap Excavator is the same as Crucible of Worlds, which is just in creature form. You can play lands from your graveyard. Yay! Retreat to Gazandu is a landfall enchantment, 2 and a green, and it says whenever a land enters, choose one, put a 1/1 counter on target creature, gain 2 life. It's simple, it's small, but it does enough. It puts a 1/1 counter on Obuun. Alright, next up we have Scape Shift. This card is this card's a game ender, frankly. Scape Shift exists to end games. 2 green for a sorcery, sack any number of lands, search your library for up to that many lands, put them on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Yeah, you want, 10 Morag triggers? You want 10 Obuun triggers? You want 10 Felidar Retreat triggers, a Miria Angel? All of those good landfall cards that you have are just insane. Absolutely insane. With Scape Shift, it's ridiculous. Alright, next up we have Scute Swarm. It is a 1/1 for 2 and a green. It's an insect. Has landfall. Whenever a land enters under your control, create a 1/1 green insect creature token. If you can control 6 or more, instead create a token that's a copy of Scute Swarm. This card's in here because it's broken. It's absolutely broken, and it's even more broken when you take into account that Mutate works really well with it. So you make it. I chose Sawtusk Demolisher, not because I'm going to get additional Mutate triggers. You don't. When you make the copy, it's just a Sawtusk Demolisher with the characteristics of a Scute Swarm as well. But it's a 6/6 Trampler that I can get out for 4 mana. That's the whole reason. That's why Scute Swarm and Sawtusk are in here. That's a ridiculous combo. Scape Shift, bam, you got 90 of them. We got Tireless Tracker here. Whenever a land enters, investigate, which makes a clue that you can pay 2 to sack and draw. Whenever you sack a clue, put a 1/1 counter on Tireless Tracker. So she grows really nicely too, but also creates card draw opportunities. And last in our landfall category is technically more of like literally landfall. Like if your lands die, you get to make a 5/3 green elemental creature, and she also gets you a land back when she enters. But she's a 3 green for a legendary elemental, and she herself is a 5/3. Great card, and she also combos with Omnath Locus of Rage, because if she dies, or any of the elementals you've been making die, bam, there's 3 damage. Go nuts. It's just annoying that they're 5/3s and Omnath makes 5/5s. Like, come on. I need 2 types of elemental tokens. Are you kidding me? Nah, it's really not that big of a deal. They're 5 power. That's a lot. I mean, even in Commander, generating 5/5s on the regular, or 5/3s, is really, really good. Alright, so we're going to skip over the growth category for a minute, and we're going to talk about the Kaboom category, because this is a very specific category, and I just wanted to call it Kaboom instead of removal. It was just more funny that way. But anyway, we're playing Force of Vigor. It's the green force from Modern Horizons. You can exile a green card from your hand rather than pay its cost, and it lets you destroy up to 2 artifacts or enchantments. This is just great for pinging down problem artifacts or enchantments, and the fact that you can play it for free on somebody else's turn by just pitching a green card you're not using is really nice. Kazul's Fury is one of the Zendikar flip lands. It enters tapped if you play it as a land side, but I don't care. It's a fling. It's a fling for 3 at instant speed. And basically what you do here is if somebody's going to kill, like, Obuun, just fling him. That's a lot of damage if you've built him up really nicely, so just fling him. Ondu Inversion is another one of the flip lands here, and frankly, we are only playing it because it's one of the flip lands. If this was not a flip land, that mana cost is absurdly prohibitive. But it destroys all non-land permanents. And remember, we have the ability to make all of our creatures into lands, so Ashaya is really important in this deck, but Ondu Inversion is nuts in here. Same reason Hour of Revelation is here, and I was just waiting to talk about Ondu. Hour of Revelation is really incredible. It can be as low as a 3-drop board wipe that destroys all non-land permanents, which means we can just mess up somebody's day by playing Hour of Revelation while we have Ashaya out. Please note that your permanents, your creatures, while Ashaya is out, do not count for the reduction for Hour of Revelation, due to the fact that it checks for 10 or more non-land permanents on the battlefield. So do be aware of that, don't misplay on this, but if your opponents have a nice packed board state, Hour of Revelation can be a game changer when you wipe their boards and you're left with a ton of stuff still. Next up is Shatter Skull Smashing. This is another one of the Zendikar flip lands, but this one's actually amazing. The backside is one of the Bolt lands here. Let's see if I can pull that side up. I can't, that's okay. But it is X red, deals X damage divided as you choose among up to 2 target creatures or planeswalkers. If X is 6 or more, it deals twice that instead. Really great card. You can really, really raise the ceiling on this card, and the back half is a potentially untapped red land. Very good. And then lastly, Swords to Plowshares. With the Yargle art, because why would you not play the Yargle art? I actually do not own the Yargle art, but I just think it's so funny that I had to include it here. But Swords to Plowshares is a great card. Really amazing in Commander. The life gain is essentially pointless. It's a 40 life format, and giving somebody 2 life is not a big deal. Giving somebody 4 life is not a big deal. Great card. Alright, next up we're going to talk about our card draw in this deck as well. We've got Eladamri's Call. This is a tutor. Green-white, instant, search your library for a creature, put it into your hand, shuffle, bam, done, reveal it, so on and so forth. Garruk's Uprising. Whenever it enters, if you control a creature with power 4 or more, draw a card. Your creatures have trample. That's insane considering how big the creatures that we're making are. While the lands that we make from Obuun do gain trample, Obuun himself does not have it, so this is a provider there. And whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters, draw a card. Really, really great card. We've got Green Sun Zenith, X and a green sorcery, search your library for a green creature with converted mana cost X or less, and put it onto the battlefield. Shuffle Green Suns into your library. I debated between this and our, what is it, the one really great one from War of the Spark as well. I settled on this one. Realistically, you could play both, but I was just having trouble finding a solid cut that would allow me to play the other as well. But the other one's really great as a mana sink when we have a ridiculous amount of mana to finish the game. So I think playing both is completely valid, and if you would like to play the other one as well, Finale of Devastation, that's what it is. If you'd like to play that as well, go wild. Great card. Horn of Green is Greed is next, not Horn of Green, though we are playing a lot of green. This card is colorless. It's a 3-mana artifact, and it says whenever a player plays a land, that player draws a card. Horn of Greed is fantastic. While everybody gets access to the card draw, we are taking more advantage of it than probably anybody else in the game, and so we're going to be drawing a lot of cards. We've got a dual finisher and card draw card next, Return of the Wild Speaker, which is, in my opinion, one of the best and, frankly, most underrated rares out of Throne of Eldraine. You can choose one, draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-humans you control, or non-human creatures you control, get +3/+3. Really, really great, really turns your creatures up to the next level, or draws you a ridiculous amount of cards. Sylvan Library. It's Sylvan Library. This card is ridiculous. If you don't know what Sylvan Library does, 1 and a green enchantment lets you draw 2 extra cards each turn at the cost of 8 life. Or 4 life to draw 2 cards. Or 0 life to play to gain or draw 0 extra cards. But, I mean, frankly, we're in a 40 life format. When you play Sylvan Library, realistically, you should look at those additional 2. And probably pay the 8 and keep them. It's valid to put them back if they're not, like, good. But have a way to shuffle if you do. Luckily, we have a lot of ways to shuffle. Next up, we have 2 flip lands in a row. We've got Turn Timber Symbiosis, which is 4 green, green, green. It is a bolt land on the back, so enters tapped unless you pay 3, makes it green. But it's a sorcery that says look at the top 7 of your library, put a creature from among them into the battlefield. If that creature has CMC 3 or less, it enters with 3 1/1 counters on it. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. We play a lot of creatures. We play a lot of low-cost creatures. So 7 mana may not seem incredible, but sometimes you hit an Omnath, sometimes you hit a Morag, sometimes you hit a Lotus Cobra or Llanowar Elves. But either way, I think that when we have a large extra mana sink, the opportunity cost of essentially playing a land with a free spell stapled to it is really big. And, I mean, frankly, looking at 7 is really not that small of an amount. And we've got one more Zendikar flip land here, Valakut Awakening, which is 2 and a red for an instant. Put any number of cards from your hand on the bottom of your library, then draw that many +1. This card's really excellent, especially when we consider how many cards we're drawing, because Valakut Awakening essentially lets us, like, quasi-tuck away the cards that we don't want or need, and then draw that many back, and it also replaces itself with that many +1, and in the worst case where we don't really have a need for this, it's a land on the back. Great card. And then also we have Worldly Tutor, which lets you search for a creature, reveal it, shuffle your library, put it on top. It's Worldly Tutor. It's an excellent card. Just as good as Eladamri's Call, except, it's 1 green as compared to green and white. But Eladamri's puts it into your hand while Tutor puts it on top. All right. It's time. We're going to talk about the Protection and Growth suites, which I think are really, really good in this deck. Growth is all about, essentially pumping Obuun, but pumping everything in some cases. We've got Blackblade Reforged, which is a 2-mana artifact that says equip creature gets +1/+1 for each land you control. Obviously, it's an equipment. Excuse me. It equips a legendary creature you control for 3 mana, or for 7 if it's not. Put it on Obuun. Just freaking put it on Obuun. 5 mana to grow Obuun by the sheer number of lands you control, and then he makes your land a huge... play Blackblade Reforged. It's great. We've got Citadel Siege, which is 2 white for an enchantment. When it enters, you choose cons. There is no dragons text on it. It's not there. Dragons is so bad compared to cons. Your cons choice is the beginning of combat on your turn. Put 2 1/1 counters on target creature you control. Every combat. Morag waves high. Dragons, on the other hand, lets you tap target creature a target player controls at the beginning of each opponent's turn. Or beginning of each opponent's combat. 1 creature. 1 in Commander. Yeah, it ain't great. So I think cons is just a massive, massive swing and an amazing choice here. It does so much for you. It grows your Obuun. That's really important. We've got Hydra's Growth here, and I'm going to be honest, I kind of put this in here as a meme, but I also think it's actually pretty good. Don't hate me. 2 and a green. Enchantment. It's an aura. You enchant a creature. When it enters, put a 1/1 counter on enchanted creature in the beginning of your upkeep. Double its 1/1 counters. Look, this is what Obuun does. If you can keep him and your growth alive, you're going to have some huge trample lands swinging in, I'm just telling you. We got Invigorating Surge, which does kind of a similar thing as Hydra's Growth. It puts a 1/1 counter on target creature you control, then doubles, but it's an instant, and it only costs 3 to play. We've got the Great Henge here, which is kind of an everything card. It costs 7 green, but you're almost never going to be paying 9 mana for this. You're really going to be paying closer to 2 the majority of the time, because it costs X less, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. You can tap it to add green, and gain 2 life. But the part that I put it into the growth category for is whenever a non-token creature enters, put a 1/1 counter on it, and then draw a card. It does everything. You add mana, you gain life, you put 1/1 counters on stuff, you draw cards. Great Henge is incredible. And then finally, in our growth suite, we have Together Forever. This is more of a protection card than a growth card, but when it enters the battlefield, you support 2, which puts a 1/1 counter on one of up to each of 2 creatures. But you can choose target creature with a counter on it, and when that creature dies, return that card to its owner's hand. I think this card is really good. You can use it as a political tool if you really want to as well. You can give that effect to an opponent. Or you can use it to save your creatures that you've put 1/1 counters on, which should be most of them if you've got cards like Felidar Retreat out. And you can even selectively target creatures with Obuun in order to give them that recurability with Together Forever. Next up in the protection suite here, we've got Ballagad Recovery, which, again, is just one of the Zendikar flip lands, and it's the reason I'm playing that one over a card like Regrowth or its ilk. It is 2 and a green for a sorcery. Return target card from your graveyard to your hand. Lets you grab anything, and then it can also be a tapped green if you need it. Boros Charm is here. It's an instant for Boros, so red, white. Choose 1. Boros Charm deals 4 to target player or planeswalker. Permanents you control gain indestructible until end of turn, or target creature gains double strike. This card is so hilariously flexible in this deck. You've got so many good options. The indestructibility is really nice, especially if somebody's running a board wipe and you don't have like Ashaya around to protect. And the double strike is actually a really, really big deal with the size that Obuun and your lands can start to get. We got Destiny Spinner here, which makes your creatures and enchantment spells unable to be countered, and also serves as a sort of finisher, actually really a finisher, because you can pay 3 and a green to make a land become an XX elemental with trample haste, where X is the number of enchantments you control. Amiria's Call is the next bolt land, the ones that come in, pay 3, enters untapped. 4 white, very expensive sorcery, but it creates 2 4/4 white angel warriors with tokens with flying. Bleh, can't read my words in order today, apparently. But non-angel creatures gain indestructible until your next turn. So this gives you an entire turn cycle of indestructibility. Really, we're playing this again because it's an okay effect stapled onto a perfectly playable land, and so I think that is more than enough here. We have Heroic Intervention next, which is just premium protection. 1 and a green, instant, your permanents gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. It's real hard to deal with Heroic Intervention. It's a great card. We have Sun Titan here for some recurability, for white, for a 6/6 giant with vigilance, and when he enters, attacks, you can return target permanent with CMC 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. We're playing Swiftfoot Boots instead of Lightning Greaves here. I have a reason for that, I promise. It's because if you used Swiftfoot Boots and attached it to Obuun to protect him, you could no longer target Obuun with your +1/+1 counters, and you kind of need to. So Swiftfoot Boots is in there as a protection piece without the raw power of Lightning Greaves, or at least the mana cost of Lightning Greaves. But I think it's still very much worth playing. We have the absolute staple, Teferi's Protection. Man, that is a difference in price as well. It's an instant for 2 and a white. Till your next turn, life totals can't change, or your life total can't change, and you have protection from literally everything. All permanents you control phase out, and then you exile Teferi's Protection because that's busted. Frankly, this card is just like the best best protection in the format. Truly incredible card, and it lets you just dodge everything, a ridiculous amount of things. We have Terra Eternal next, which we are playing because it says all lands are indestructible, and we want our lands to be big and swinging and not die because we don't want to lose our lands. It's only 2 and a white to play as well, and when you have Ashaya out, it makes all your creatures indestructible too, which I think is real good. And as we mentioned earlier, along with Terra Eternal is Tomic Distinguished Advocist from War of the Spark. White for a legendary human advisor. He's a 2/3 with flying. Lands on the battlefield and land cards in graveyards can't be the targets of spells or abilities your opponents control, and it shuts off your opponent's ability to play lands from the graveyard. I don't think that last line of text is really all that relevant, but the stopping your opponents, giving your lands on the battlefield and graveyards hexproof, essentially, is really good. And what I think is actually even more important about this is it doesn't actually give them hexproof. It just says they can't be the targets of spells or abilities, which means that your opponents can't even remove hexproof from them. Atomic is really, really strong, and then even protects himself once you get Ashaya out. And that essentially, Atomic plus Ashaya is just absurd at that point. Really, really excellent card, I think, in a land creatures focused deck. And that gets us through all of our non-lands, so let's really quickly blow through our lands here. We are playing every single fetch. If you don't have the fetches and you don't want to pay for the fetches, do not play the fetches. Replace them with other dual lands, like the Pain lands that are fairly reasonable in price, or just put some basics in, it's fine. Balance your land base based on your stats as best as you can. I went a little low on red and about equal on white, but went very hard on green just due to the reliance on it. But we have so many ways to mana fix because of these fetch lands here. We're playing Arid Mesa, Bloodstained Mire, all of them. We are additionally also playing Prismatic Vista. Even though we're not even playing a ton of basics, it's nice to just be able to rip them out. Additionally, we are playing Command Tower, Bountiful Promenade. So this is the Battle Bond. I think they call them crowd lands now. These are really great. Command Tower taps for any color in your commander's identity. Exotic Orchard. We're playing 3 colors, so Exotic Orchard is bound to hit somewhere. We're playing Crows and Verge, which is kind of like a slow fetch, but it gets us 2 lands. For that same reason, we are running Myriad Landscape. We are also playing, there we go, Sacred Foundry, one of the other shock lands in here, and then additionally Stomping Ground, which is the 3rd and final shock that we can play in these colors. We also have Spire Garden, which is another one of the crowd lands from Battle Bond, and once Commander Legends comes out, we will have the 3rd crowd land that we can put into this deck. These are amazing because even though they don't have basic land types, they are essentially untapped dual lands at no cost other than you have more than 2 opponents, or 2 or more. Additionally in here, we are playing 2 plains, we are playing 2 mountains, and we are playing 2 forests. We've also got a couple other flex pieces here. We've got Needle Verge Pathway, which turns into Pillar Verge Pathway on the back. We are playing Branchloft Pathway, which is green-white, and then we are playing Crag Crown, which is red-green. We're playing all 3 of the pathways that Obuun can play. And then Darksteel Citadel is just kind of a silly little addition I threw in here because it's a really good target for Obuun's first ability because it's indestructible. And so you can have an indestructible XX with trample and haste without any additional costs. So I think that's just kind of a nice little cute addition. I'm playing it more to be silly and cute than I really am to do anything else, but I don't care. I think it's hilarious. One thing that you can improve in this mana base, especially if you're not playing a lot of fetches, is up your basics or typed land types. The Tango lands from Battle for Zendikar are a really good way to do that. Just to give you more targets to hit with recurrable fetches. Something I've been considering as I've been building and testing this deck is potentially cutting a few of these flip lands like Ballagad Recovery and just putting in normal basics if I find myself not having enough targets with these fetches. You've got options though, and so feel free to adjust and flex your deck as you see fit. The mana base, as always, is merely a minor suggestion, and you are free to build it in whatever way you would like. I just really like the flexibility of having 11 cards that I can play, well, 13 cards that I can play and sacrifice to get more lands out of my deck and thus trigger more landfall while thinning the deck in the process. I think that's an important part of this deck. Alright, so let's do a really quick playtest and have a look at how the deck messes around a little bit here. So, we've got a really nice opening hand with 3 lands. We've got, Ondu's Sky Ruins. We've got Arid Mesa. We've got Windswept Heath. We also have a Horn of Greed that we'll be able to play early, as well as a Talisman. And then a card draw and protection piece. Let's go ahead and take a draw for a turn. It's a mountain. We're going to go ahead and play and crack Windswept Heath, taking a life. We will search, and we're going to go ahead and grab, let's see, it's Forester Plains. We will grab, let's say, I don't need Sacred Foundry. Yeah, we need green. So I think we're going to grab Stomping Ground, and we're going to let it enter tapped. And then shuffle. All right, next turn, we untap. There's a Marsh Flats, but I don't think we need Marsh Flats right now. I think we're actually just going to play the Mountain. Tap it, play the Talisman. Pass the turn. Move on to the next turn here. We're going to go ahead and throw out... yeah, let's just play the Arid Mesa. We'll crack the Arid Mesa, which will allow us to grab a mountain or a plains. And I think we will go ahead and grab... you know what? Let's just grab a plains, because I'd like to use all of our mana this turn. And we have Marsh Flats here in our hand, which will let us grab another plains-typed card. So we'll shuffle, and then we'll actually just go ahead and immediately tap 4 to toss Obuun out there. We are not going to make any of our lands creatures because Obuun does not untap that creature, and we'll just move on to the next turn. Very nice. Teferi's Protection. We're going to play Marsh Flats and crack it. That's a landfall trigger, so we add a counter. We're going to search, and we're going to go grab, I believe, our Temple Garden is probably the best bet here. Now, looking at our hand here, we have access to 4 mana. Is there anything we want to pay 4 mana for? Honestly, no. We've got Garruk's, which is 3. We've got Hornegreed, which is 3, Knight of the Reliquary. So we can go ahead and let our Temple Garden enter tapped if we so choose. However, I think the correct move here, and particularly to hold up Heroic Intervention, is to pay the 2, let it enter untapped, and then pay... Let's see. How do we want to do this? Yeah, let's just pay 3 using our lands and go ahead and drop Knight of the Reliquary, which I will add is already a 5/5. So we're going to go ahead and set that just to make it a little easier to track. He's a big boy already. We also got an additional landfall trigger, so Obuun is now a 5/5 as well. So we'll go ahead and swing at our opponents for 5. Untap and draw. There's another talisman. That's what I like to see. So we'll go ahead and, let's see, we'll tap a white and a red, play Talisman of Impulse. So we have access to 4 mana here. We're going to go ahead and play Ondu Sky Ruins, which enters tapped and gives us another landfall trigger. There we go. So we have access to 4 mana right now. I think the correct option right now is probably to play Garruk's Uprising. So we'll tap green, green... let's go green, green, green. We'll play Garruk's. We do have an untapped, or a creature with power 4 greater, so we will draw a card. And there's a Valakut Awakening, which we can use next turn just as a land drop, most likely. We'll go ahead and swing in for, let's see, 5 plus 6 will swing in for 11. Alternatively, which is totally viable, we could have tapped this Talisman instead of like a Temple Garden. I think that's actually the correct move here. And we'd have an additional 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points of damage there. We're going to go ahead and untap. Now we're going to go ahead and draw Evolution Sage. That's real good. Let's go 1, 2, 3. Play our Evolution Sage. Next, we're going to play our Valakut Stoneforge, which does enter tapped, but we get a 1/1 counter. We also get to proliferate with Evolution Sage. So we'll go ahead and put... You know what? Here, actually, this could be even more fun. We're going to put a 1/1 counter on the Knight, and then we'll proliferate, which gets us a counter on each of them. I think that's more value right there. Next up, let's see. We got 4 up. I think we'll actually hold these up, and we'll turn Ondu Inversion into a 7/7. And there we go. We're swinging 7, 14, 21 points of damage, which will end the game if our opponent has no permanents. Granted, we've got 2 other opponents to mess around with, hypothetically, so let's just have a look. We play a land. We put a 1/1 counter. We put a 1/1 counter. We proliferate. We put a 1/1 counter. We put a 1/1 counter. Yeah. We'll probably have played Horn of Greed before that, but I just wasn't thinking about it, which gives us a card. There we go. That gives us a Scalding Tarn as well. Obviously, we cannot play that at the moment because we only have 1 land drop per turn. That's the fair way to play Magic. But we have good access here. Let's have a look. I think probably the best move right now, actually, is to... Do we Knight? Is Knight bigger? Does that do more, or is it worth it? Yeah. We're going to Knight of the Reliquary. We're going to sacrifice this tapped Plains. We're going to go search out literally any land. Literally any land. Let's go grab... Sure, let's grab Myriad Landscape, which is going to enter tapped. Doesn't really matter. We'll shuffle, and that gets us another Landfall trigger. That gets us another Evolution Sage trigger. So our dudes are big. We got a 11-11 now. We'll go ahead and swing him, as well as this random Plains that's also 11-11. There's 22 points right there. We can untap and we can draw. We can play a Scalding Tarn, which is going to once again just add 2 1/1 counters to each of these guys, thanks to Obuun's ability and Evolution Sage. Sorry, not 2. 1 on there, 2 on Obuun. I think that actually means Knight is at 6, not 8. Wasn't paying attention to my tracking there. We're going to go ahead and crack the Scalding Tarn, which allows us to go get a mountain. We're going to go get a mountain, probably. Unless there's a better... No, I already have Stomping Grounds up. We'll grab a Marsh. I could grab Sacred Foundry, but I'm not really worried about it. We'll play a mountain. And that's another Proliferate trigger, another Obuun trigger. We'll add 1. We'll add 1. We'll add 1. Additionally, we played a land, so we draw a card. Yay! Alright, so our lands are looking kind of ridiculous right now. We've got Myriad Landscape here. We're going to tap 1, 2, and sacrifice Myriad Landscape, which lets us go get 2 basics that enter tapped. That's fine. They have to share a type. So we're going to go grab, let's see, I don't think we've grabbed any forests, so we'll grab 2 tapped forests here. Beautiful, look at that. Alright. And, yeah, that's 2 more triggers, so add 1 with Obuun, proliferate. Add 1 with Obuun, proliferate. Yeah. I think we're in a pretty good spot right now, wouldn't you say? Our Obuun is currently 1919. We have 2 different pieces of protection sitting here, and we're actually going to go ahead and tap 1, 2 to play Swiftfoot Boots, and 1 additional to equip it to Obuun. If an opponent tried to stop us at that point, we have Teferi's Protection if we wanted, but I think Heroic Intervention would probably be the correct choice in that, so that our creatures are still around to be able to swing. But we would move to combat here, turn this mountain into some danger. And then, there we go. We've got 14-14. We've got 2 19-19s. I mean, honestly, all of our creatures have trampled. That probably ends the game as is. And if it didn't, we've got things like Ramanap Excavator that we can start every single turn, bringing back like a fetch or a myriad. Even if we don't find anything with it, the fact that we can pull them back out as a guaranteed land drop every turn is just terrifying. Let's have a look at a couple additional cards. There's more removal. There's more 1/1 counters. There's Titania. Yeah, so, really, the big takeaway I can give you with Obuun is you want to be really aggressive. You want to get those lands out there. You want to protect your Obuun as much as possible. Save that mana for your protection spells. And use your removal proactively to get threats out of your way. You want to generate as many landfall triggers as you absolutely can. And I think that's going to win you the game in no time. So, I've been Zach from MTG Friends. I really hope you enjoyed watching this video and learned a little bit about our buddy Obuun, Mul Daya Ancestor, and his exorcism attempts by possessing lands and everybody wanting to kill him. They want to get rid of him. Don't let them get rid of him. You gotta win! So, if you would like to be a friend of the gathering, please consider subscribing down below, and please leave us your comments as well as a like if you'd like. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to see your feedback. So again, thank you so very much for watching, and hopefully we'll see you in the next episode. Bye!